Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever Yates in the Backcountry YouTube video. In this first episode, I got something really cool to talk about, and that is the results of the big aero ballistics study. There's been a lot of buzz about this thing in the industry, and rightfully so. It does have a lot of information that's going to make you a better bow hunter and archer. We've got information to help you make your arrows better, both more ballistically efficient, less drop, and so that they recover quicker, so you're more accurate. So those are a couple of things that we're going to talk about today: the drag of your arrow, how it recovers, and then we're also going to talk about noise intensity. So stay tuned. So I don't even know, it's kind of hard to even just jump in. This project was so big, it's kind of hard to even just where to jump in. And that's where I'm here to help you, right? I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a consulting engineer. I deal with numbers on a daily basis. This study generated like 5,000 different points of data. We shot 1,500 shots. So really what we want to do today is really narrow your focus as you look at this data, how you can decipher it, interpret it, more or less walk you through what I think of this data and how it applies to bow hunters in general. So really, that's how this study got started, because I've had these questions for a long time. And I'm the type of guy that wants to have facts or data backing my decisions. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to do that because you always have the human element if you're kind of doing it yourself. So we had the opportunity here to partner with a few different companies to help bring this study about. The first was Precision Cut Archery. Tristan at Precision Cut Archery is a good friend of mine, and he has a ballistics app essentially that does tremendous things in the background. It's got a lot of math crunching, a lot of numbers crunching, and we can actually take velocities from an arrow, a launch velocity and a downrange velocity, and calculate what's called a drag coefficient from those velocities. A drag coefficient you can think of like a ballistic coefficient. So we can get one number that characterizes the ballistic efficiency of an arrow. So from that one number, we can compare all sorts of different arrow builds and see how ballistically efficient they are. So that's one side of this. The other side is lift. Lift is a term that I'm using that means it's a force that basically corrects the arrow in flight. Lift is generated by a difference in pressure across the vane, and that difference in pressure aligns the arrow with the streamline so that it corrects itself. So drag is a bad thing. It slows your arrow down, and lift is a good thing. It corrects your arrow. So those two things are kind of in competition. Unfortunately, in a vane design, you can't really get lift without some drag. But in this study, we definitely wanted to be looking at vane combinations that minimizes drag and maximizes lift. But really, in order to do this kind of scientifically, we needed to eliminate the human component of it. And that's where Easton came in. Easton was a great sponsor for this project. They actually funded the project, and then they also, more critically, donated to us or allowed us to use their pneumatic precision shooting machine. Time and time again during this study, I saw that shooting machine shoot 12 field tip arrows into a 2-inch group at 70 yards. So the thing is ultra consistent, and that really helped us take the human element out. So that kind of sets the stage of how we set up this study. The other concept that we're going to be talking about is noise. And for that, we partnered with another company called Archery Sound Lab, who has a dedicated sound chamber to isolate the sound of the arrow without the background noise, without all of that. Let's start by talking about how the study was conducted. The study was conducted, we had a baseline arrow build. So this baseline arrow build consisted of 27-inch carbon to carbon Easton axis 5mm arrow. The control fletching that we used was a AAE Max Stealth because it's a fairly common vein. We used a gold tip ease pull point, and that basically anytime that we were using a mechanical as a control element, we decided on a Sever 2.0, and anytime we were using a fixed blade in a controlled test for multiple different veins, we used the iron wheel wide. Beyond that, we tested 34 different vein configurations, and I believe we tested, I think it was 27 different point types, so filled tips to mechanicals to fixed blades. So as I mentioned, to test for drag, we needed to get two velocities. So that's a launch velocity and a downrange velocity. So that we were able to capture the velocities with the Garmin Zero C1 Pro Chronos, one at essentially half a yard from the bow and one at 60 yards from the bow. So with the arrow passing over those chronos, we got velocities, and from that we put the velocities into Precision Cut Archery software, and we were able to back calculate the drag coefficient. So that's how we got the drag. For the lift, what we then did was after we did the drag, the bow was a 2025 Hoyt Alpha AX2 29. It was set to 28-inch draw length and 70 pounds. So that bow we took out of tune, physically moved the rest, changed the cam lean, and then beyond that, in the shooting machine, we actually torqued the bow horizontally. We took it out of tune horizontally, and we torqued the bow horizontally so that we were generating about a 1.5-inch tear at 15 feet. So taking the bow out of tune, we've introduced some angular velocity or angular misalignment to force the vanes to have to correct the arrow in flight. So that correction, we can quantify that correction. So when those arrows impacted after they were shot with that misalignment, when they impacted the target 70 yards away, depending on how much lift the vane generated would determine where those impacts would land. The better the lift, the closer they would impact to the intended point of aim. The worse the lift, the more drift they would have. So that measurement, or the displacement or drift, however you want to think of it, is a quantifiable number that it doesn't actually measure the force of lift, but it gives us a good idea what we really care about. Bow hunters don't really care about the force of lift or quantifying it. What we care about is minimizing that deviation, that drift, and that number, that drift, is a number that we can quantify and associate with lift recovery. First results that we're going to talk about are the most accurate broadheads. So honestly, broadhead accuracy wasn't something that we set out in the beginning to try to capture. But as we were shooting different broadheads with our control arrow, so all the broadheads were shot on the same 18 arrows. We used the same 18 arrows and rotated through all the broadheads. We started noticing that some of the broadheads were grouping much better than other broadheads. I already kind of mentioned that I saw that shooting machine time and time again shoot a dozen filled tips with that control arrow in a 2-inch circle. And as we were shooting all the mechanical broadheads, we started to see, several mechanicals were grouping really well on these control arrows, and some of them weren't grouping as great, and some of the fixed blades were grouping well, and some of them weren't. So we decided we were quantifying that. We were measuring group sizings and noting them, and we were taking pictures of some of the groups. So to share some of those groups, the Sever 2.0 was one of the groups, one of the mechanicals that flew really well. In general, we were seeing really good mechanicals, basically like the Sever, the Schwacker, the Thorn. Those three were probably the top three flying mechanicals in terms of producing a small group. All three of those broadheads were literally ripping apart vanes, breaking arrows, and they were producing like 2.5 to 3 inch groups at 70 yards with 6 arrows. So it's pretty good group, almost right on par with the field tips that we were measuring. Then in the Beast Broadhead also grouped pretty well, not quite as good as the Sever 1.5, 2.0, Schwacker, and Thorn. The Sever Hybrid also performed well, probably on par with the Beast, and it was probably 3.5 inches on those. The rest of the mechanicals were kind of in that 4 to 5 inch range. Some of the ones with a lot of surface area and a lot of contours grouped worse. Surprisingly, there was a couple of mechanicals fixed blades that really flew really well. The absolute best flying fixed blade out of the shooting machine on our control arrow was the Evolution, I believe it was the Jekyll. It produced a 3-inch group with 6 arrows 2 different times. The next best were the Slick Trick Standard 4-blade and the Grim Reaper Micro Hades. Both of those probably produced groups in that 5 to 6 inch range, 5.5 inches. The rest of the fixed blades kind of suffered a little bit, as fixed blades often do at 70 yards. Groups opened up a little bit, and we were probably looking at an average fixed blade group of like 6.5 to 7 inches. So just in general, field tips were grouping like this, mechanicals were grouping like this, and then fixed blades were grouping like this. That's out of a shooting machine that was putting all field tips into a group like this. So that kind of just goes to show how much more forgiving mechanicals are than fixed blades. For a Western hunter, which is where I primarily hunt, I want my broadhead to hit behind the pin, and mechanical broadheads just do that a little better. We saw that time and time again shooting in the shooting machine, that the mechanicals just simply outperformed for accuracy the fixed blades. Again, the one exception to that was the Evolution Jekyll, which shot really well. So that's kind of talking about the arrow groups. Next thing I want to get into is the aerodynamics of a broadhead. So with that same baseline or control arrow, we had about 18 of them, and we cycled through all of the broadheads on those arrows. And what we were doing is we were trying to get a drag coefficient for each and every one of these tip types, field tips, mechanicals, and fixed blades. So with that, we shot over the Garmins, as I previously said, and we were able to use the ballistic engine from Precision Cut Archery to calculate these drag coefficients, or ballistic coefficients, if you want to think of them that way. So we have a figure here to share. So this table here shows the 27 different tip types. They're arranged in ascending order. So it starts with the tip type that has the lowest drag, and it increases from there. So you can see the top, I think 5 are all field tips. That's nothing crazy. You would expect the field tips to have the least amount of drag. And then right below the field tips, the two highest, two lowest, so lower drag coefficient is better. The 2 lowest drag coefficient are the Thorn Rift and the Beast. Both of those actually are kind of tied for that first place. There's a very marginal difference between the drag coefficient. honestly, if you were to start applying some statistics to this, which we have done over on the Precision Cut Archery website, that's got the whole statistical breakdown, those pretty much overlap. So they're basically tied for first. Then below that, the next three are kind of tied for second, and that's the Evolution Hide, which is a bit surprising because it has that somewhat big cut on contact front blade. The Schwacker, very streamlined, and the Sever 1.5. All three of those pretty much tied for second. Strangely enough, in third, you've got a fairly big but a longer fixed blade. It's the Magnus Stinger, and then some more mechanicals, and then the Iron Will Solid fixed blade actually performed really well. So the Magnus Stinger and the Iron Will Solid both, I wasn't expecting that they would outcompete several of the mechanicals, so that was really interesting. The Iron Will Solid 100 grain and the Magnus Stinger both outcompeted for drag several of the mechanicals. As you get further down the list, you'll see some of those bigger 3-blade mechanicals, and then your 3 and 4 blade fixed blades. Anything vented had more drag. You can imagine that's more surface area for the wind to catch on, and that's all just generating drag. So that table kind of summarizes the drag coefficient. Now again, minimal drag from the Broadhead is going to promote. It's going to help you maximize your trajectory, and the reason why that's important is because you want to be able to think about if you get a miss range at 70 yards. Let's say you're off 2 yards on your range estimate. Well, if you've got a flat shooting arrow, that 2 yards may not push you outside of the kill zone if you've maximized your trajectory, right? So that's why this is important. You want to minimize the drag of your arrow so that you build in some forgiveness into your arrow design, your bow and arrow design. If your arrow has less drag, it's going to drop less, and that's going to give you some range forgiveness in case you screw up on your range. Less drag is also going to mean more energy downrange. So that's why that's important to you. The next table that we're going to look at, very similar. We're going to look at the aerodynamics of your fletching configuration. Now this one comes with a grain of salt, and the reason for that is the most aerodynamic arrow that you could shoot would be a bear shaft, but that's just not reasonable, right? We can't shoot bear shafts with broadhead, so you need to have some amount of vane. But like I said, you don't need to go and shoot a big vane for a mechanical that may not require as much steering. So there's a happy medium there between the ballistic efficiency or the drag and the lift. So in this next table, we're gonna we've done the same thing. We've organized this table with all the 34, 35 fletching configurations. Gives you the name of the vein count, the configuration. That means the helical, what it was fletched with, if it was straight, 2 degrees of offset, 4 or 5 degrees with the ease fletch, and then we have the drag coefficient for the different veins. Like I said, this is going to have a little bit more relevance further on when we start talking about some compounding effects of vein, of drag and lift. But for the most part, as you'd expect, the smaller the vein, the less drag that it has. You can look through this and see kind of the veins here. We're eventually going to have more information about surface area and dimensional breakdown of each of these veins to make some really cool plots and figures showing drag versus surface area or drag versus frontal area. That's not quite ready yet, but that's something that I'll put on my YouTube in a subsequent video. So stay tuned to that. So again, this is really important for you, trying to match your drag to your tip type. If you're shooting a streamlined mechanical, you can get away with less drag. If you're shooting a big fixed blade, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to pick a vane configuration that has more drag and more lift. Again, we're going to get more into that in the future. But this list here shows you how ballistically efficient each one of these vane configurations are on the baseline arrow setup. The next category is basically talking about the lift, or how well each vane configuration controlled a broadhead best. Now for this one, as I mentioned before in the beginning of this, when I was talking about the baseline or control arrow design, when we're trying to keep things apples to apples, the fixed blade that we used across the board, we used a mechanical, and that was the Sever 2.0, and then we also used the Iron Will wide 100 grain. So when we took the bow out of tune and then we torqued it in the shooting machine horizontally, we were able to quantify that drift that each vane produced when it was shooting the Iron Will wide specifically. So this next table is basically, so what we did is we took, every time that we shot a group of arrows, 6 arrows, it was 2 field tips, 2 mechanicals, the Severs, and two Iron Will wides. We shot that group and we shot it for 2 different vane setups. Then we went down, we took a photo, and then we used a CAD software to analyze the photo to get measurements off of it. And that displacement, or those measurements, we used in relation to one another to figure out how this vane controlled the drift versus another vane. So if we took all of those drift measurements for the Iron Will wide, for example, we averaged all those drift measurements up, and we came up with an average. Then what I did was I normalized this table such that the average was 0. So the numbers that you see in this table, you see that first entry is AAE Air Razor Talon, minus 6.3 inches. That means that the Talon drifted 6.3 inches less than the arithmetic average of this test. So that means that the Talon, that Talon vane, had more lift recovery, recovered the arrow, minimizing the drift better than any other vane in the test. Right below that, as you'd expect, you've got your higher profile vanes, AAE Hybrid HP, Boning Blazer, both of those very similar shape. AAE Max Stealth 4 Fletch, Boning Blazer, Flex 360, AAE Max Hunter, your Max Stealths, your Air Razors, DCA Super Saber, Iron Will vane. That kind of rounds out the top 10. All of those vanes, as you can see, anytime you see a negative in that column there, in the drift column, that means it performed better than the average. You can deep dive in this table a little more as you will, and to see which fletching configurations minimize the drift when shooting that Iron Will wide. We've now set the stage talking about drift, the drift that we just talked about with lift, and then drag. So those both go hand in hand. So it's kind of important to look at those simultaneously. So I've come up with this with a plot where on the y-axis I show the drag of the arrow, the drag coefficient, and on the x-axis in an XY plot I show the lift. What I did, just for ease of communicating this, I normalized the data set so that the best performing vane configuration for drag is 0, and the worst performing is 100, and the opposite of that is true for lift. The best performance for lift is 100%, and the worst performance for lift is 0. So this one kind of needs a little bit more discussion as well. Like I said before, depending on what vein you're shooting, or sorry, depending on what broadhead you're shooting, will kind of tell you a bit how much vein you need. And you also need to be kind of introspective as well. Not everyone is going to be able to shoot to my standard, right? And I'm not going to be able to shoot to Bodie Turner's standard. So we all need to be real with our shooting ability. Not even so much our shooting ability at the range, but our shooting ability in the heat of the moment. So if you know that you can't really hold your stuff together in the heat of the moment and you do tend to shank a shot, you're probably going to want to have more vein on the back of your arrow with more lift than drag. If you're shooting a really streamlined mechanical and you're Bodie Turner and you can keep your stuff together, you can get away with a lot less fletching for a mechanical. And that's one thing that I was really surprised with in this study was being able. It was quite apparent you could get away with a lot less fletching for mechanicals than you could with fixed blades shooting out of the shooting machine. So the lower right hand corner, you can see basically where you have 0 drag and 100% lift. That's your ideal point. No vein obviously had 0 there. That point doesn't exist, so it's kind of an idealized point. But what I've plotted in this curve, you can see the vein setups configurations that are as closest to that lower right hand corner of the plot have the best combination of drag and lift. And that's a 50-50% weighting. Now, depending on you as the archer, that may not be the case. You may not want to apply a 50% weighting if you're the type of guy that unfortunately can't hold his cookies in the heat of the moment and kind of shanks a shot or two. You're going to want to err on the side of more lift. So you may not want to be in that perfect mix of drag and lift. So what I plotted are radial lines propagating out. The green, yellow, orange, red lines are radial lines that are equidistant from that idealized point. Again, that's a 50-50 blend of drag and lift. You can see from this plot that there are 3 veins, vein 21, 32, 15. That's the Silent Night 2-inch, the DCA Super Saber, and the Tack Driver 225. All of those veins had the best combination of drag and lift in the test. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are the best veins for you to shoot. You got to have to think inwardly about how well that you shoot here. You have to be very critical of yourself because otherwise, if we were all shooting machines, we could all just shoot broadheads on bare shafts and maximize our drag. But we can't do that, right? We need to have some lift in the arrow, and depending on how well you shoot, especially in the heat of the moment, will tell you how much lift you need. Certainly, if you've been bow hunting for a while and you can keep your stuff together. Those veins 21, 32, 15 might be great veins for you for streamlined mechanicals. I probably wouldn't be recommending shooting fixed blades with those veins. In my opinion, that's too little a vein. Even if you can hold your own on the practice field with broadheads with those veins, I'd be a little concerned about using those veins in the field. Where you got awkward footing, awkward angles, the excitement of shooting at an animal. But to each their own, right? This kind of shows you how they performed relative to other veins. I'm not here to tell you which vein's best, but just kind of show you the data. That vein 30 and 33 performed well. They were inside that next arc. Again, a pretty good veins there. And then the other group of veins that I really like is the 1, 8, 14, 17, 3, and 9. All of those veins have a really good amount of lift. They were some of the top performers in lift, and they have a moderate amount of drag, but there's certainly a lot of veins in the study that had more drag. So these these combinations of veins. One is the Air Razor 26, AAE Air Razor 26. 14 is the Boning Blazer. 8 is the AAE Max Stealth. 17 is the Flex Fletch 360. Number 3 is AAE Hybrid HP. And number 9 is the Talon, which was the top performing vein for the lift recovery. Anyway, all of those veins perform really well for lift recovery and have a moderate amount of drag. That means that they're going to steer your bigger bigger mechanicals really well. They're going to steer some small and medium fixed blades really well. Personally, if I'm shooting a big fixed blade, I'm going to probably be erring on the side of extreme lift. So I'd be looking at that Hybrid HP or that Talon, just because they were the top producers of lift recovery and honestly had less drag than some of the 4-fletch or the max helical fletching configurations. So again, this plot you really need to look at, study. You need to be very introspective. How well can you shoot in the heat of the moment when trying to decide on your vein configuration? I would always err on the side of a little bit of extra lift, meaning that lift at the end of the day is going to help you remain accurate even if you botch a shot. Drag, minimizing drag is a good thing to help flatten the trajectory of your arrow to maximize your energy downrange and that your arrow's not dropping as much. So you kind of need to be real with that combination there based on your shooting ability. Like I said, this plot is one that I'm pretty proud of, and it was a fundamental plot that from the beginning that we wanted to produce. And I think it has a lot of really valuable information that you're going to have to internalize yourself and see. But here you just have a great comparison, head to head, all of these veins, the same exact scenario, how they performed for lift and drag relative to the other veins in the study. So the next category that we're going to look at is noise. Noise to me is a big part of selecting an arrow build, particularly a fletching configuration and the broadhead. Now, unfortunately, we did not have enough budget nor time in the study to test all of the broadheads for noise, but we did test all of the vein configurations for noise. Now, generally speaking, selecting a quiet broadhead, most streamlined mechanicals are pretty quiet. And for the fixed blades to err on the side of quiet, you want to be looking for a solid blade fixed blade, smaller diameter, mechanicals that have a lot of blades exposed are going to be a little louder. So it's kind of easy to select a broadhead that's a little quieter. On the vein side of things, it can be a little tougher to see it. So we studied that. We actually partnered with a company called Archery Sound Lab. Early on in the testing, we had a great conversation with Jamie, who has a master's degree in acoustics, and he has a very specific sound testing chamber to isolate the sound of the arrow without basically isolate the sound of the arrow from the ground noise or the surrounding noise. He also understands how to synthesize the data and take it one step further. He synthesized our data for how a deer hears the sounds, which is not the same way that a human hears the sounds. So he was able to synthesize the sounds of each vein, how a deer hears them head to head against one another. Now, in this next table, this table is again in ascending order. We're looking at the sound, the decibel level of each arrow in the test. Now, the way sound works, the way the decibel scale works is every 10 a difference in 10 decibels actually means that a sound is twice as loud. So if there's a difference in 10 decibels, that means that the one that's 10 decibels more is actually twice as loud. That it's a little hard to understand, but that's how the decibel system works. It's based on it's a log base averaging, and so that's just what it means. So in this case, the best performing fletching for sound or noise was the Fletch 360, and the worst was the Fletch Quad X 4 vein, 4 Fletch. The difference between those two was about 10 decibels, which means the Quad X 4 Fletch was twice as loud as the Fletch 360. I'm a big believer that sound, vein sound is a big deal. To me, the sound of the bow going off is an instantaneous crack that is not continuous, and it kind of actually sounds like a stick going off in the woods, a stick breaking. Again, it's non-continuous. It's not approaching the animal. To me, the hiss and the buzz of an arrow going towards an animal is what they're reacting to. They react to things getting close to them, predators getting close to them. So I think that's what's causing the majority of reaction from the animal. So minimizing that fletching sound, I think, is a big deal. The arrow sound in general. And that's kind of where we've produced this plot to show you the different sounds on an apple-to-apple basis of all the different veins. I think that everyone should have a focus on trying to produce a quiet arrow. To what extent is kind of personal. I've personally been shooting the Fletch 360 vein for about 10 years now. And a big reason why I've settled on that vein, it was the quietest vein I've ever shot. And it was actually very intriguing to actually see that vein was quieter than even some of the really miniature veins that we studied in this test, that we tested in this study. Considering how much lift the Fletch 360 generates, I was really surprised that it was quieter than the Fletch 1A7 or the AAE Max 23s. Those are all considerably smaller veins, but yet that Fletch 360 with its gradual profile is really quiet. So I think this is a stellar plot. I think you should study it. I think you should have an eye to noise. I think you should be thinking about the noise of your veins. And this table is here to help you compare and contrast the different veins for noise. The next section to go over in the test is arrow diameter. So we tested arrow diameter. We tested primarily 4mm and 5mm arrows, and we did shoot some 6.5mm arrows. I've gotten a lot of questions why I shoot 4mm arrows. And to me, in the wind testing that I've done, they drift less in the wind, and they have less drag. I've never been able to quantify it until this study, but through this study, we were actually able to quantify that 4mm arrows have on our baseline design, so the same apples to apples fletching configuration, same field tip. A 4mm arrow has 10% less drag than the equivalent 5mm arrow. 10% may not sound like enough, but at longer ranges, that can attribute to inches of wind drift and inches of drop at extended range, 60, 70, 80 yards. So it is a big deal. Bow hunting is a game of inches, and if you can improve or lessen your wind drift or tighten up your trajectory so it's a little flatter simply by choosing a thinner diameter arrow, to me that's an easy choice, and that's honestly why I shoot 4mm arrows. So not to belabor that point anymore, moving on to arrow length. Again, arrow length was something easy for us to test. We took 27-inch carbon-to-carbon arrows, 29-inch carbon-to-carbon arrows, and 31-inch carbon-to-carbon arrows, and we shot them over the chronos. We're able to back calculate drag coefficients with the same baseline configuration for each arrow. Do note that on the longer arrows, the 29 and the 31-inch arrows, we did use a stiffer spine that did increase outer diameter slightly, but overall feel pretty confident that the increase in drag that we saw is more because of the length of the arrow than that marginal increase in diameter because of the increase in spine. As you would expect, arrow drag is proportional to arrow length. It actually looks like by the 3 measurements that we measured that it's actually proportional to arrow length squared. This is applying this for the Western hunter. I think this is just evidence to cut your arrow as short as you can. Now, cutting your arrow short will affect the tune, so I'm not suggesting that you just go out and lop off as much of the arrow as you can. That does affect your tune, and tune is always going to trump drag. But if you are able to achieve a good tune with a shorter arrow, it's going to have less drag, which means less wind drift, and it's going to have less elevation drop at distance, which means it's going to be more range forgiving. This last plot, I'm really kind of proud of. Now, the plot that I just showed you before, with the lift on the x-axis and the drag on the y-axis, this next plot is essentially that same plot, but instead of all of the dots colored in with just a generic blue, now they're actually colored in on a scale of sound intensity. So this plot is now showing drag versus lift versus sound. So the three paramount things that we've looked at in this study, this one plot has all that information. It's the same layout of the dots as you saw before. Again, you're trying to find that best combination of drag and lift. But now the dots are colored in with sound intensity. Green meaning quiet and red meaning louder. So if there was one plot to boil this entire study down to, it would be this one. You need to spend a lot of time studying this plot. This plot has the information you need to optimize your arrow design. And I think if you take time to look at the data and be a little introspective of your own shooting ability, you're gonna see that there's some clear winners there for each and every tip type, right? So I think that about does it in terms of the data. Now, one thing that I need to say is this is the first, but it's definitely not going to be the last YouTube video I produce on this subject. I have a lot more things that I want to talk about. I didn't draw a whole lot of conclusions here. I kind of steered you in the directions of some vanes that I think would be good for streamlined mechanicals, or vanes that I thought would be good for little bigger fixed blades or medium-sized fixed blades. But I do intend to have a YouTube video where I talk about not the study, but James Yates's interpretation of the study. I tried to say somewhat agnostic in this video. I do have my opinions on what I'm going to shoot. Again, it's a little bit introspective, but I've got that coming in a new video. Going to be doing another video on if I think 4-fletch is worth it. So if you've been itching your head, if you think 4-fletch is worth it, tell you what, the data's there. So if you're into analyzing the data yourself, you're going to be able to see and draw the same conclusion that I'm going to draw. But I'm going to help you along there. The other thing that I'm really excited about is jump into the sound stuff a little bit more. We got some really cool things planned there. Also, we've had each and every one of the vanes scanned for dimensions, and we've got models of each vane. So plan on putting up a whole lot more results looking at surface area vane versus drag versus lift, that sort of stuff. Frontal area. Again, a lot more information to come on different topics that we're going to be able to drill down. So the sky kind of is the limit. And beyond that, I'm really just excited to apply my engineering mindset to all things hunting. Not only do arrow stuff, I'm heavily into open sight muzzleloader and long range centerfire rifle. A lot of gear reviews. I'm very anal about the gear I use and how I organize my stuff for the field. And I think all of this stuff, weapons optimization, gear optimization, I think it all leads to success in the field. So that's the kind of the stuff that I want to go over on this YouTube channel. Again, this is the first video, but it's certainly not going to be the last. It's all going to be great technical content. I really think that if you apply the things that I'm talking about in this video and in my future videos, I think you're going to come away with a great arrow design. I think we're talking about things that are really going to impact how accurate you are and how forgiving your setup is in terms of that range forgiveness I keep talking about. How little drag your arrow produces will mean that it's dropping less at distance. So I think this information has the ability to kind of really help the industry kind of steer it in a good direction. For the first time that I am aware of, we had a very controlled process. We're making all of the data available to you all. As close as we could match the scientific method with a controlled system, a controlled experiment we've tried to implement. So I'm really hoping that these results, that you find them useful. I know I have learned a tremendous amount, and I think if you apply them to your arrow builds, you're going to become a much better bow hunter with a much more forgiving arrow setup. Okay, wrapping up my first YouTube video. Want to thank you guys for bearing with me this long. I know that this was long-winded, but there was a ton of data to go over. The first release of these results. There's going to be a lot more results that I release on this page. 3 versus 4 fletch. Got strong opinions on that one. You're going to want to stay tuned for that. How far out can a deer hear each in one of these veins? You're going to want to stay tuned for that. So like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications of these future videos. Also, I want to stay really engaged with you guys, so leave a comment as I'm producing more content related to this archery ballistic study. This is going to be an ongoing annual thing. Next year, we're planning on doing wind testing, FOC. If you have some suggestions, I'd like to engage with you in the comments. Don't be overly critical if you're critical of the study. Still do want to hear any comments related to that. We did have a budget and a time constraint, but if you liked something, if you want me to explore something a little more, please leave a comment. Let's have a conversation there. Lastly, Western Hunter has an article that I wrote. Basically follows the same path as this YouTube video. It's written. I do not stumble over the written word as much as this YouTube video, so this may be a little cleaner for you to go read. Also, Precision Cut Archery has all the raw data and some synthesis, some results over there on that page. And lastly, want to thank Precision Cut Archery Easton for helping me bring this study about to you guys. Also, thank you to Hoyt, Hamsky, and Spot Hog for supplying the stuff for the bow. Anyway, thanks again. Appreciate you for you listening and watching this video, and we'll see you next time.